And because we're running a little bit behind, what I'll do is I'll ask you to save questions for our panel or for the speaker's corner. And I'd like to turn to Colleen Mills-Finnerty, who I can see already has her slides up. And Colleen, is your mic on? Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Definitely can. Yep. Fantastic. So if you'd like to go ahead and get started, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. So today I'll be talking about aging online and some implications for mental health. My name is Colleen Mills-Finnerty, and I'm the PI of the Behaviors Biology Lab at the Palo Alto VA, affiliated with Stanford Psychiatry. So what I'll discuss today is late life well-being. Why is it important and what do we know? And then I will very briefly cover a series of studies that we've been doing in my lab and working with Amit Etkin's lab at Stanford on links between mental health and age and potential biomarkers of healthy aging and how we can use this for the future. So late life well-being is an important topic, not only because all of us are in the process of growing older, but our societies are growing older. So in the US, we will face an inversion in the next few decades where older people will outnumber younger. And so as more of us grow older, our needs change, and we really want to put people on healthy trajectories rather than the trajectory of social isolation, complicated medical problems, and the more sad outcomes that we think of as people get older. Also in the time of COVID and social isolation, we're thinking more about how technology plays a role in this, and that will be a theme throughout this presentation. So an important determinant of outcomes in late life is something called the brain age gap, which refers to the fact that your chronological age can deviate from your brain age. Your brain age is fluid, it's influenced by context and factors like stress. And we know that having a larger gap between your chronological age and your brain age confers a higher health risk. And this health risk is actually specific for neurological and psychiatric disorders, with a really big impact on whether you develop dementia, but also depression and cognitive impairment. And this fancy diagram is just showing the strength of that relationship. As I said, recruiting and conducting research in older folks is always a complicated endeavor. Research recruitment is usually the most costly and time-consuming aspect of any human subjects research. And increasingly, we're finding ourselves in a position of needing larger samples to do the kind of modeling that we might be interested in. And openness to telehealth in older adults may have been a challenge more so in the past, but now with COVID, since it's forced a transition to online for many people, this may be a unique opportunity to reach a group of older folks that we might not have otherwise, as people start socializing and interacting on their phones, their tablets, computers, Zooming with their grandkids, things like that. So we've been using online methods for several years now. I've listed the ones that we've used in bold, but a variety of other ones exist. And these tools really help bridge the gap for us in being able to collect large groups of older adults online. And so I'll touch on what I'm using as I go through the presentation. But I want to get into study one, which is a somewhat surprising link between mental health and age in a large online sample. So the background of this study, which was led by my colleague Sharon Naparstek, the goal was to establish feasibility and age norms for an online neurocognitive test of verbal working memory. And so for this study, 800 participants were collected on Amazon Mechanical Turk using Inquisit for the task. And a surprising finding came out of this study that the oldest groups of adults in the study actually had pretty high performance on this memory task. And it was speculated in the manuscript that a possible explanation was that engaging in cognitively challenging tasks might be beneficial to older adults, or perhaps the older adults who are drawn to this sort of work on Amazon MTurk might be a unique group. And so in some follow-up analyses, we explored other aspects of this group's demographics. And like many have reported, MTurkers are pretty diverse in terms of education, pretty evenly split in terms of age and gender, although we did have lower numbers in our oldest group, which I'll talk about a bit later. But the interesting thing was that there was a high prevalence of anxiety symptoms, shown here in the red, was people above cutoff, and also in depression, that about 40% of our sample endorsed clinically significant symptoms, and 15% even endorsed major depression level symptoms. Despite this fairly high above the population prevalence, we found a negative relationship between age and mental health, where older age was actually significantly associated with better mental health, corrected multiple comparisons. And this relates really directly to a theory developed by Linda Carstensen here at Stanford called socio-emotional selectivity theory, which posits that your priorities basically change as you approach end of life, and you begin to value positive experiences and social connection more than you might have otherwise, and that this is a hallmark of healthy aging. So we really got interested in these interactions between cognition and emotion in older adults. A second study that we recently completed requires a little bit of background on the task format. So we were studying attention in a general population 18 plus. Attention capture refers to the pop-out effect that you may have heard of. If you're shown one green dot after another, and then all of a sudden there's a pink one, the pink one's going to pop out, and this exists in nature, it exists in how we design society. A specific case of attention capture is value-based attention capture. And in this case, a former reward value of a stimulus is what makes it pop out. So the way that this is done is people are trained to associate a distractor like a red circle with a high monetary reward, and then that red circle is shown to distract them while they're searching for a neutral target. And this seminal paper from Brian Anderson's group showed that the reward value modulates how distracted people are. Interestingly, for other research going on in the lab, it appears this effect does not occur in people with depression. So people with depression are not as distracted by high value rewards. And so we wanted to design a study that was aimed more at the mood aspect of attention to reward, but improving upon some of the previous designs, which, as you can see, use pretty low dimensional stimuli that aren't very real world. A red circle doesn't actually give you $5, but food rewards are a modality that we can study using images that has more real world value, and we can individualize it to our participants. So we did a study on, again on mTurk, this time using Unity for the task, to test whether attention to reward is intact for food reward. And so this is the task format and the team that put it together. Essentially, people just rate their foods for like or dislike, and then we show them their most liked foods and least liked foods as distractors while they search for a neutral target. And we did find the effect that we hypothesized, where the high value rewards slowed people down more than low value. But for this presentation, what was more interesting to us was that this attention to reward was enhanced or greater in older people relative to younger. And so that's what you're seeing in the bar graph on the left. And on the right, this is just showing that it wasn't due to error rates or inattentiveness that actually trended to be negative. And so this unexpected finding led us to dive into the literature and found actually 2 previous studies that had found essentially the same thing, but that no one was really putting together that this might be a preserved function in later life. And why is this important? So getting back to late life well-being, if reward sensitivity might be a mechanism of late life well-being, the blue line here is tracking the expected increase that people would have in their mood, in their social connectedness as they get older. However, we also know that people age 50 to 65 are in a high risk factor group for depression and actually are the highest rate of suicide in the United States right now. And so we think that perhaps a decline in reward sensitivity in middle age might be related to a major depression diagnosis, which in turn is also predictive of mild cognitive impairment and subsequent dementia. And so when you're thinking about the trajectory of dementia at 80, really we want to trace back to middle age. And so to target these questions directly, we are conducting a 3rd study now that is currently collecting data, really digging into attention to reward in healthy aging. And this is a pre-registered data collection analysis plan. You can read it at the link on the slides. We're using a combination of REDCap, Mechanical Turk, Gorilla, and Unity for our tasks. And we're also recontacting the folks from study 1 to get follow-up mood ratings now in the era of COVID, since that data is from 2018. And I'm showing you here the Gorilla workflow that we're using. And Gorilla really allowed us to put in 5 additional tasks beyond just our attention task very quickly and easily. So we were able to expand the range of question that we were asking in this online study. And the hypotheses here are that older adults, we expect them to show intact reward function across a variety of domains now, branching out from just attention to reward. And we want to relate this intactness of reward function to intactness of cognition. So are more reward sensitive older adults more or less cognitively intact? And again, the reason this is important is that reward sensitivity may be predictive of depression, and depression is related to cognitive outcomes. So in some preliminary analysis from our pilot cohort, we first replicated the same effect of older age being related to better mood. So this is showing depression scores, the PHQ-9, GAD-7, anxiety, and then a satisfaction with life scale. And the first 2 are significant, and the third is a trend. But this is just showing that this is maybe a consistent pattern in our mTurk sample. And to summarize, what we found with this study is that it's feasible and accessible to study older adults, with a slight caveat that we did have lower representation in our 70+ age group. For us, scientifically, that's not as much of a barrier, since we're interested maybe in the middle life to late life transition, but it would be nice to have more of those folks. And what I'm hearing from some of the other talks is that this may just be an internet adoption issue and not a platform issue with mTurk or Prolific or any individual platform. We're also really interested in why these older adults who are online may have some cognitive and emotional advantages, because we would want to harness this into interventions. And a lot of the existing brain training kinds of programs have had really modest success at best. There's a lot of snake oil out there, and so we really want to improve upon this in what we deliver to people. And also we want to predict who is on healthy versus a pathological trajectory, with implications for precision medicine, being able to intervene earlier, maybe when people are in the depression phase and not in the MCI phase just yet. Because as we know, many of the drug treatments for Alzheimer's really are only effective in the early stages right now. And we think that technical accessibility is going to change the game in this field in particular, because more people are adopting technology to socialize and potentially do work like on mTurk. And as it becomes normalized to communicate with your loved ones this way or your doctor this way, I think there'll be a better adoption rate. And so we may be able to bridge that gap in our oldest adults eventually if we keep going. So I'd like to acknowledge the team that has made these studies happen, my grant mentors and co-mentors, and our funders who've made this work possible. And thank you for your attention.